There's a problem with the Canon R5 Mark II that nobody else is talking about. To be clear, this camera has a lot of really great improvements, but there are some problems that none of the early reviewers, none of the YouTube videos that I've seen, and not even the official documentation from Canon themselves mentions. And that's because most people haven't really used this camera in a real world scenario to discover those problems. Now, to be clear, I bought this camera with my own money at full price the day it was available for pre-order, and I got it the same day as everyone else. So I had no special treatment and nobody is paying me to talk about this camera. Now, on the day of the pre-order, I also ordered a whole bunch of the new batteries, and I still haven't got them, which is part of the problem that we'll talk about in a bit. So you can consider this my first impressions overview of the Canon R5 Mark II. The good, the bad, and one thing in particular that even benefits those of you who are shooting on an older Canon camera. It goes without saying that the video features on this camera are significantly improved. We, of course, now have a full-size HDMI port. The body has been redesigned, so we have, it's not really a vent or a fan, but it's essentially just a port that goes in behind the screen, behind the sensor, so like in between, that allows air to pass in and come out the other side. If you actually stick your eye in there, you can see there's like a little thermal plate, which I guess just helps dissipate a lot of that sensor heat. But of course, we also have C-Log 2, we also have 4-channel audio, and if you go into the video menu, whereas before you just had to switch to turn on or turn off C-Log and maybe switch the gamma profile, now you can actually go in, and this is the custom picture menu, which is much more intensive than what we had previously. So you actually have options to go in and set up to 20 different presets. So if one day you want to shoot in C-Log 2 and then C-Log 3 and then HLG, you can basically go in and set up all these presets. You can select the gamma, the color space, the color matrix. You can put LUTs on the video, but it basically just burns it in, so it's not super useful for me. You can go in and there are more sharpness options and basically all of the color matrix tuning that you'd expect from something like a cinema camera. And not to mention that if you're someone who wants to shoot in Rec. 709 in a non-log color space so that you can just take your footage and start editing right away, there are way more options for customizing it. And now the footage that you get, instead of being 8-bit like on the Canon R5, is 10-bit. You may have noticed that I don't have the hot shoe cover on my camera, and that's because I actually lost that little clip. It's very annoying to take on and off. Like it's not easy because I think they tried to make it like super waterproof, but also because I'm recording video all the time, I just end up taking my microphone on and off, and having that little cover, it just became annoying. So where is my hot shoe cover that is probably like a $50 item that I have now lost? I have no idea. The IBIS improvements in the R5 Mark II are definitely noticeable.
So here is an interesting test. We are actually walking on sand right now with the Canon R5 II in standard IBIS mode, no enhanced, no nothing fancy, but kind of nasty terrain because you're getting all these bumps. I am at 15 millimeters. I'm not doing anything special. I don't have any tripod handle grip, so my arm is just fully extended, which is usually the worst case scenario, because as you can see, I keep switching arms because my arms are getting tired. How does it look? Specifically up here. I personally think it looks a little bit smoother than the original R5. You be the judge. I think this is really worst case scenario. And who's that? Sony shooters, man. Always falling behind.
You know, there are 3 of us up ahead.
Oh, I guess that averages out pretty bad in my favor.
But if you're still not convinced, if you go back and watch last week's video where I was at Sony Condo, the first half of that video I shot on the Canon R5 II, and the rest of it was the Sony A9 III and the Sony A7C II. And one of the things that I can notice, having now shot on both of those systems and on other systems, is that because Canon has in-lens stabilization and in-body stabilization, you put those two together, and I do feel like the footage that you get, the video footage that you get, is a little bit smoother. Whereas with Sony, unless you put on that enhanced dynamic mode, you do notice, like, if you step or you take a big, like if there's an obstacle and you try to jump over it, you do notice that vertical jitter. But perhaps the biggest complaint with the R5 Mark II comes from these. Canon introduced a whole new battery, which fine if you're someone who hasn't yet jumped to mirrorless, but as someone who owns a ton of these older LP-E6NH batteries, it's really frustrating because on the surface, the voltage is the same, the milliamps and the wattage. So 16 watt hours, 2130 milliamps, 7.2 volts. And yeah, these are the exact same, 2130, 7.2 volts. And so at first, the difference between the old batteries and the new batteries isn't very obvious. But the problem is that you can't get these batteries. I actually placed a pre-order back in July along with my R5ii, and I still haven't received that initial allotment from my Canadian retailer. I've even gone and placed other orders with 2 other retailers, and I still haven't gotten the batteries, which you go, okay, well, that's fine, just use the old batteries. Except the old batteries don't allow you to shoot in any frame rate other than 30 frames per second, which the manual does mention. It says that you can't shoot in 60 or 120 or 240, but you also can't shoot in 24 frames per second on the old batteries. Which I discovered when I was out shooting and my new battery died, and of course I only have a ton of these, so I swapped it out and I was like, oh, why is my frame rate 30 or 29.976? And I went through the menu, and sure enough, 24 frames per second is just not available on any of the older Canon batteries. Now, this might not be a problem if you plan to replace all of your batteries, but if you're someone like me who still has their R5 and their R6 and their R6 II, you have a ton of those old batteries lying around. And if you're also like me and you tend to bring multiple cameras everywhere you go, the last thing you want to do is have a bunch of mixed batteries where, okay, your one new battery died and you got to swap, and then you're like, oh crap, I put the wrong battery in the wrong camera, and now all of a sudden I can't shoot in the frame rate that I want. I was actually so upset about this that I have now sent a message directly to Canon and said, hey, the manual doesn't mention this limitation, like what's up here? The other challenge with this is that I suspect when Canon comes out with a new R6 Mark III or whatever full frame camera they come out with next, is that they will probably also use these batteries, which means that you're gonna have this problem regardless of what camera you plan to upgrade to. So if you're someone who goes, well, the R5ii is too expensive, I'll wait for the R7 Mark II. Well, Canon is not gonna put an old battery in a new camera, it's gonna be the new battery. And if you're someone who has, like me, like 9 or 10 of these batteries, and now all of a sudden you're mixing, it's gonna create a lot of headaches. However, there is a huge advantage to these new batteries. So although on the surface, they have the same wattage, they have the same milliamps, I actually ran a test, put the old battery in the R5ii and the new battery, and I was able to get an hour and 44 minutes on the new battery versus about 50 minutes on the old battery. And having talked to other shooters who own the older models like the R5C, a lot of them have tried the new batteries and said that it essentially doubles the amount of time that you're able to record video for. The Canon R5 Mark II now sorts your photos and your videos into 2 separate folders, which makes it a little bit easier when you're offloading all of your files. But one of the things they've changed is the naming structure for the video. So it now follows the cinema cameras like the C70, where you have this big long name with all of these numbers, which is great if you're shooting on other cinema cameras. But if you're someone like me who prefers maybe like a shorter name or the ability to customize that name, there's no real way to do it. And I would love to be able to go into the menu and set like, you know, AG Anthony R5 and then just a number, like something super simple. Canon has made a lot of UI improvements, like user interface upgrades. The menu is now a lot more clear, which personally I felt the menus were already great, but they've added a little name at the top of each of the menus. So instead of saying, you know, red menu 1 or red menu 2, you can go in and say, oh, this is the image quality menu or the sound recording settings menu. So it makes it a little bit easier if you're trying to share that information with someone else. There's also a temperature gauge, so when you're shooting, you can see exactly how hot your camera is getting. And of course, there is the tally light on the front. So if I go into video mode and I start recording, you can see that the light goes red, but not only that, when your battery gets low, the little red light starts to flash. So if you're someone who's recording yourself or you're in front of the camera, then you'll know exactly when your battery is about to die. Now, because I am on mostly the old batteries, I only have one of the new batteries. And I mentioned that there was limitations when it comes to frame rates, but when you plug in this battery into this camera and you turn it on, it gives you another warning telling you what your restrictions are, but it's not very specific. It says movie recording and network functions. And you think, okay, network functions, not a big deal. Like, I'm not actively trying to send photos or send videos over Wi-Fi. So when you go to the Wi-Fi menu, the purple menu, the networking settings, it does show you that it's disabled. And at first I thought, okay, that's not a big deal, until I was out shooting and I had the Canon, the Camera Connect app, and I wanted to transfer files from my camera to my phone. Now, because I'm on Android, I can only do JPEGs, I can't do RAW, which is still a problem that I have with the Canon app. But now, if I'm on the old batteries, I have zero functionality. I'm not clear on why a battery would limit the ability for a camera to just send files to your phone. And again, this is one of those things that I discovered while I was out shooting, while my new LPE6P battery was dead, so I had no way to charge it, and I only had the old battery. I plugged it in, I thought, okay, I'm just gonna upload something quickly to Instagram, except the app wouldn't allow me to. I simply got an error code and it locked me out from using that functionality. And I realized that me saying all these things sounds like I'm complaining about this camera. Like, maybe I don't actually like it. Maybe it's not a good camera. But in reality, this is a $5,000–6,000 Canadian camera. And when you're spending that much on a camera, to spend a few extra $100 to upgrade all of your batteries is probably a worthwhile investment given how much more recording time those batteries will allow you to have with the camera. I still believe that this is the most fully featured camera that Canon has ever made. I still think it is a great option, especially if you're someone who is a video shooter, but it's just a lot of these small little things, like the batteries not being available and then being limited by the batteries that I do have, that just makes it frustrating as an early adopter. And I really wish it wasn't like this. I really wish day one I could have had all of the 9–10 batteries that I pre-ordered, because then I wouldn't have to make this video. But then maybe some of you would discover these problems on your own and probably be just as frustrated as I am now. So I'll update you when I have more information, when I officially get my stock of LPE6 batteries, and if Canon is able to respond to some of those weird things like the networking and the 24 frames per second limitation on this battery. For now, whatever camera that you're shooting on, Canon, Sony, Nikon, Fuji, Lumix, grab your camera, get out, and go shoot photos.